There is a park 3 blocks from Isaac's apartment that he has begun to visit on Tuesday evenings after work. It is not a remarkable park. A rectangle of grass, some benches, a row of plane trees that are beginning to fill with leaves. There is a fountain that runs in warmer months, not running yet. A few people walk dogs. An older man feeds pigeons from a paper bag, with a methodical patience that Isaac finds each time briefly absorbing. He sits on the same bench. He's not sure when this became a pattern. He's thinking about this when a woman sits at the other end of his bench. She is perhaps 60, well dressed, carrying a canvas bag. She looks at the park with the expression of someone who is also simply sitting. After a while she says without looking at him, "Tuesday person." He looks at her. "I'm Vera." "Isaac." She nods. They sit. The older man has run out of bread and the pigeons are disappearing with what seems like unhurried disappointment. "Do you live nearby?" Vera asks. 3 blocks. New to the area? 6, 7 weeks. She nods again, as though this explains something. Then, after a pause, "How are you finding it?" "The area?" "The after," she says. Simply, not unkindly. He looks at her. She meets his gaze with the calm of someone who has said a precise thing and is prepared to wait for its landing. There is no performance in it, no pity, just the directness of a person who has lived long enough to dispense with the long way around. "You can tell," he says. "It's not a question." "The way you sit," she says. "The particular kind of stillness. I've seen it before." She looks back at the park. Vera looks at the fountain. Not running yet, its basin collecting the season's last dead leaves. "I remember when it wasn't like this," she says, not with bitterness, with the matter-of-factness of someone reporting a weather pattern. "I was young before any of it." She's quiet for a moment. "The treatment existed before any of this," she says. "That's what most people don't know, or don't remember. It was for something else entirely, something people genuinely wanted treated." She pauses. Violent impulse disorder, they called it. People who were wired neurologically, genuinely, toward harm, couldn't stop themselves. The treatment worked, really worked, changed lives, changed families. She looked at her hands. "Nobody argued with it. How could you? It was helping people." She pauses again. "My husband used to say, the most dangerous tool is the one everyone agrees is good, because no one watches it." A silence. "There was an announcement," she says. "A government announcement. Very quiet. Very technical. New research, they said. Additional profiles identified. The existing framework, the misalignment framework, extended to cover them." She looks at the fountain. "Most people didn't even read it. It sounded like a minor update." She stops. "I read it," she says. Another pause. Longer this time. "There were people who understood what it meant," she says. "We made noise about it for a while." She looks at the plane trees. The noise got very quiet eventually, one way or another. They sit for a while after that without speaking. The pigeons reassemble around the older man, who has apparently found more bread. The fountain sits dry and full of leaves. The plane trees move in the light wind. Their new leaves pale on the underside, the kind of pale that belongs to things just beginning. "Same time next Tuesday," she says. "Same time," he says. She goes. He sits for a while longer. He thinks about what she said, about violent impulse disorder. He thinks about the word misalignment, how it arrived in the language already carrying its previous use, already attached to something people had agreed was a condition requiring correction, so that when it was extended to cover him, to cover Ethan, to cover Marcus, there was no new argument to make. The argument had already been made. The framework was already in place. The system simply filed him under an existing heading and sent a letter. He thinks, I am in the same filing cabinet as someone who could not stop himself from harming people. He thinks, the system sees no difference between us, he thinks, and it is genuinely trying to help both of us. He thinks, climbing the stairs to his apartment, I should tell Dr. Fenn about Vera. Then he thinks, there's nothing to tell. It was Dara who brought it up, unexpectedly, on a Thursday evening. They met for dinner at a noodle place near Dara's flat that was loud enough to make certain conversations feel safer than they were. Isaac had been careful with Dara. Dara knew about Ethan. Dara was, in fact, the thread connecting them, but they had never discussed it explicitly. It lived between them as an understanding, one of several things their friendship had learned to hold without naming. But Dara looked at him across the table that night with the expression of someone who has decided something and said quietly, I heard about the letter. Isaac looked at his bowl. I guess Ethan told you. He didn't give me the details, he was worried. He doesn't need to be. Isaac, Dara's voice was very gentle. Has he gotten one too, or just you? Just me, he picked up his chopsticks. So far. Dara absorbed this. Are you going to consult? I don't know. If you consult, they confirm. If they confirm, I know how it works, Dara. A silence. Around them the restaurant was loud, with ordinary evening noise, other tables, laughter, the sound of a kitchen working. Marielle went, Dara said eventually. Marielle was someone they both knew peripherally, had known. Last autumn, I saw her on the street, about 2 months after. She looked... Dara stopped. She looked fine. She was pleasant. She asked about my work. Another pause. It was like talking to someone who had moved to another country, still her, but far away somehow. Different. Isaac said nothing. I'm not saying this to influence you, Dara said. I know. A silence. There are other options, Dara said. She said it quietly, not quite looking at him, her eyes on the bowl in front of her. Not the two in the letter. Other options. Isaac looked at her. I'm not saying more than that, she said. I just want you to feel that the letter doesn't contain the full inventory of what's available. He looked at her steadily. At what cost? Dara was quiet for a moment. He could see her assembling something, not a lie, not quite a truth, something honest about the limits of what she could offer. A different cost, she said finally. Not smaller, different, she paused. I've watched people pay it. Some of them are still paying it. Some of them, she stopped, started again. The system is patient. That's the thing people underestimate. It doesn't come for you dramatically, it just waits. And the waiting wears things down in ways that are hard to see until they've already happened. She looks at him then, directly. I'm not telling you it's not worth it, she said. I'm telling you it's not simple. And I'm telling you it exists, that's all I can do. Another silence. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. They finished dinner without returning to it. The conversation moved elsewhere. Her work, a film, the small currency of an ordinary evening. And neither of them reached back towards what had been said. But it sat between them for the rest of the meal, present and unresolved, the way the most important things sat between people who cared about each other and knew the limits of what caring could offer. He thought about it all the way home. He walked the long way, down Carver Street. And this time, he did stop outside the wellness office. The desk was empty, closed for the evening, and the chairs inside were still, and the plant on the windowsill was some kind of succulent, small and self-contained, that needed very little. He stood there for a while. He thought about the various shapes the future could take, the ones that were spoken, the latter's two options, the measured language, the form with its boxes, The ones that weren't spoken, the third shape Dara had named without naming, and the ones that were spoken between no one, the configurations he and Ethan had circled without approaching, the island together, the clinic together, and all the versions of together that the system's architecture had made structurally difficult to think about because the letter arrived with his name on it and his name only. And the processing was individual, and the system had designed the choosing to be done alone. He stood at the window and held all of this, and found that the holding was as much as he could do with it. Then he turned from the window. Then he went home. Ethan was in the kitchen when he arrived making tea. He looked up when Isaac came in. The green-grey eyes found him in the usual way, but something in them had settled differently tonight, as though a weight had been added since morning. "Good dinner with Dara?" Ethan said. "Fine." Isaac set his keys in the ceramic dish. He stood for a moment. "You told her." Ethan's hands paused over the mugs. "I needed to talk to someone." He looked at Isaac steadily. "I didn't tell her anything you wouldn't tell her yourself." Isaac nodded. He came to the kitchen and stood beside Ethan at the counter, close enough that their arms touched. And Ethan handed him a mug and they stood like that, not speaking, drinking tea. "Are you angry?" Ethan asked. "No." "You can be angry." "I'm not." He looked at the window above the sink. The glass showed him the room reflected, the two of them slightly luminous against the dark outside. "I'm tired." Ethan rested his head briefly against Isaac's shoulder. The weight of it, specific and known, pressed into him. "Me too," Ethan said. 2 days later, Ethan's letter came. Isaac was not there when it arrived. He was at work. He came over in the evening and found Ethan at the kitchen table with it open in front of him, looking at it with the expression of someone who had been looking at it for some time and had moved through several things to arrive at a stillness that was not peace but resembled it. Isaac stood in the doorway. He did not say anything immediately. The letter was on the table and Ethan was sitting with it, and the room had the specific quality of a room in which something has already happened. Not happening now, already done. The air adjusted around it. He came in, he sat down across from Ethan. He did not reach for the letter. They sat. After a while, Isaac said, "When?" "This morning." Another silence, longer this time. Ethan looked at him across the table with an expression Isaac couldn't quite read, as though he were waiting for a specific word, a specific question that didn't come. Outside, a car passed. Inside, the kitchen held its particular evening light. He looked at Ethan. Ethan's face had the particular stillness of someone who has been waiting for two things simultaneously. For a fear to become certain, and for something else, something smaller and more private, to either open or close. It had the quality of both happening at once. He was not crying. Isaac had seen Ethan cry twice in the months they had been together. Once at a film, with a rueful self-awareness that made Isaac love him sharply, and once in the night, quiet, which he had never explained and Isaac had never asked about. This was neither. This was the other Ethan, the one who had learned before Isaac to be very still in the face of what could not be fought. Isaac looked at the letter on the table. He thought about all the things it meant that it was there. He thought about the shapes of the future again, the ones spoken, the ones not spoken, the ones that had been available to them before this letter and were still technically available now, in different configurations. He thought about all of this and said none of it. The not saying felt like the most honest thing available. But underneath, the not saying something else ran quieter and more private. He had stood at the wellness office window and held the configurations, the island together, the clinic together, and had set them down because the holding was as much as he could do with them. The letter on the table brought them back. He held them again briefly. He set them down again. "Your brother," he said instead, quietly, when it felt like Ethan was ready to be somewhere other than alone with it. Something shifted in Ethan's face when he said it. Not disappointment exactly, something more interior than that. Then it settled and he began. Yes, a pause. I've been thinking about Marcus. Tell me about him. He was 3 years older, he said. He was very funny. The kind of funny that's also serious. He understood things quickly. He was quiet for a moment. We weren't close in the way some brothers are, but we knew each other, you know. Isaac said he did. When he got his letter, he came to tell me in person, Ethan said. I asked him what he was going to do. He said, I'm going. Just like that, very calm, very certain. He paused. I asked if he'd thought about the other option. He looked at me, not unkindly. Marcus was never unkind, and said, I know what the other option does. I've seen what it makes people. I'm not doing that. Ethan touched the corner of his own letter. That was Marcus. He made decisions the way he did everything. Fast, clean, no revision. And you let him go? I did, Ethan said. I drove him to the processing centre. It was a Wednesday, early morning. He had a bag, not much in it. They said you couldn't bring much. He stopped. He hugged me in the car park. He said, don't be careful on my account. And then he went inside. A silence. That was 3 years ago, Isaac said. You've heard nothing. Nothing. He looked at Isaac. Not one word. I wrote the first year, to the address in the materials. The letters weren't returned, but they weren't answered. He folded the letter in front of him, once, twice, into a small rectangle. I used to think, well, I used to try to imagine what the island was, what it looked like. Whether he stopped. Isaac waited. There are people, Ethan said quietly, who don't think it exists. The room was very still. What do you think? Isaac said. Ethan looked at the folded letter in his hands. He looked at it for a long time. I think, he said slowly, that the system is very good at building things that look like one thing and are another thing. He paused. I think the forms in the processing centres and the materials and the wellness officers are all real. I think the apparatus is real. He paused again. I'm not sure the destination is. Something cold moved through Isaac. Ethan. I might be wrong, Ethan said. His voice was steady, not distressed. The voice of someone who has sat with a terrible possibility long enough that it has become a fact they carry rather than a fear that carries them. I've thought about it every way that I can think about it, and I genuinely don't know. Nobody knows. The system has made it so that nobody can know. He looked at Isaac. 3 years of silence from Marcus. I've looked for other accounts, carefully in the places you look carefully. I've found people who say they've had word, indirectly, through long chains of people I can't verify. I've found people who say silence is a policy. I found people who say... He stopped. What? Isaac said. Ethan looked at the window. Who say that the silence is the point, he said. That a state that wanted to run a humane resettlement program would find a way to allow some communication. 1 letter a year, something. The silence isn't administrative, it's designed. The room held this. Isaac looked at him. And you're still choosing it? Ethan turned the folded letter over in his hands. Yes, he said. Why? A long silence. Because, Ethan said, if there is an island, if Marcus is somewhere living, making the best of an impossible situation the way Marcus always made the best of impossible situations, then I want to find him. He paused. And if there isn't, he stopped. Started again. Marcus chose to be himself, all the way to the end, whatever the end was. His voice was very quiet. I think I can only respect that by doing the same thing, he looked at Isaac. I can't choose the treatment. I've sat with it and I can't. Not because I'm brave, because I know what it does, and I know what I'd be afterwards, and I'd rather... He stopped. Say it, Isaac said quietly. I'd rather not be, Ethan said, than be that. The words in the room. Not dramatically, not as a speech or a declaration, as a simple statement of preference made by a man who had thought about it thoroughly and arrived at a plan and a devastating conclusion. Isaac looked at him. He thought, he's telling me he would rather die than be what I'm about to choose to become. He thought, he's not saying this to wound me. It wounds me anyway. Okay, he said. His voice came out wrong, thinner than he intended. Ethan reached across the table and covered his hand. It's not a judgment, he said. I need you to understand that. What's right for me is not what's right for you. You're not Marcus, and I'm not you, and the choice, he pressed his hand, the choice belongs to whoever is making it. That's the only thing the system hasn't managed to take. Isaac looked at their hands on the table. He thought, one of us may be walking towards death, and the other towards a life without the self that made it, and I cannot tell which outcome is worse, and I suspect that that is also by design. He held on.